This episode of the podcast is sponsored by Sruly Bornstein. And although Sruly is sponsoring this as a friend and as someone who is a fan of the Sefer that is the topic of this podcast episode, Eim LaBinah of Yaakov Emden, the Yaavetz, I would like to give a shout out and a mention to Sruly's famous, excellent Daf Yomi shir, Likud Daf Yomi. I'm sure many listeners are familiar with his Daf Yomi shir, but if you're not, check it out. I'll put a link in the show's notes. I would especially like to mention, whether you do Daf Yomi or not, it's, I think, very interesting to listen to his Reid Bites, which are kind of these, some are smaller, some are longer, kind of, not sure how best to describe it, where he discusses Reid and different, some discuss different Svarim, and different, some historical backgrounds, but there's a lot of Reid Lumdis, some things from Shalos V'Tshuvas. They're very interesting. So you can check those out. And actually, there's a couple that discuss Eim LaBinah of Yaakov Emden, the Sefer. So I'll put those in the show's notes. So check those out. Some are very short, a few minutes long, very interesting. And so just wanted to mention that. Now, as always, if anybody has any questions, comments, or feedback, email me, svarimchatter@gmail.com. And if anyone would like to sponsor an episode, or just support the podcast in any way, monetarily, I will put a link to PayPal in the show's notes, or you can email me for Zelle, QuickPay, svarimchatter@gmail.com. I'll mention again, I mentioned this last week's episode, I'll mention again that there are a couple of really interesting episodes coming up. Ravi Shul Hartman on the Moral's Shabbos HaGadol Drasha. There's a good episode on blood libel, and I have some really other really interesting and good episodes. I think so. Of course, I'm the gay over, but I think so. Some interesting episodes. So if interested in any of them, you can let me know. And then one last thing, I've asked this a couple of times, and some of you definitely listen to this. I appreciate it, which is if you can subscribe, but especially if you can rate and review on Apple Podcasts. I do appreciate that. So for those of you that have done so, thank you. And for those of you that haven't, if you use Apple or if you have Apple, if you would consider doing so, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Svarim Chatter podcast. On this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be joined by Reid Zweibel, who published the Sefer from Yaakov Emden, the Yaavetz, entitled Eim LaBinah, which is Chedushim U'Perushim Al HaTorah, and it's from Yaakov Emden's, as we'll discuss, his Mekores Gedolos. We'll post pictures and we'll talk about that as we go. It's from his manuscript of the marginal notes all over his copy of Mekores Gedolos. So thank you, Reid Zweibel, for joining me.
Hello, thank you for having me today.
So let's tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your background.
Okay, I was born in London, and when I went to it, when I got a bit grown up, I went to Yeshiva at the Soil, and I was learning a Mir Yeshiva with the R Elimelech quite a few years. And then what happened is that someone came up to me one day that would be working on the Ksaviyat on Shilis Yaavetz of Rabbi Yaakov Emden. So, I wasn't into this line. I just took it for just learning the tshuvas. There's no Rabbi Yaakov Emden. Every tshuva is become chelik or klal yisrael psak halacha, and it's used in every besmedrash and every halacha that you just then can discuss in this sefer. And I was just starting doing this sefer, and as doing this job, we found there's a copy of the Shilis Yaavetz in British Library of Rabbi Yaakov Emden himself, what he printed, and he wrote marginal notes on Shilis Yaavetz. And there's quite interesting argues there, additional halacha, and quite interesting. It's his original copy is always interesting, and it was quite. And as by sitting in British Library, we took his chumash, big chumash, Mekores Gedolos of Rabbi Yaakov Emden, and it's a very interesting chumash that he's been using 50 years or more. and it's full of marginal notes. And we thought it would be quite a good idea to just to print it and to print it out to the R Elimelech. People should see this big work of his life work. And as I have a friend, it's called Zweibel, and he printed once on Parshas B'Shalach. He couldn't on Parshas B'Shalach in a final night and asked him, why don't you just follow on and doing it? So he said, yeah, it's a hard work and we'll see. Anyway, I said, okay, I'm going to start and do it. Do you mind? No problem. Let's go ahead. When I started working on it, I recognized why everyone wouldn't do it anymore. I should mention the years, there's the Kovetz Kerem Shloimer from Bobov. And he always printed Ksveyat from Gedolim from libraries, pieces from here and there. And he always quoted from this Ksaviyad, quite a few pieces of this Ksaviyad of Yaakov. But as he only took the easier pieces, the one that was written like very nicely and clearly. But as I tried to go into it, so it's more than hard, than I would say more than like impossible. And as we started working, I could say I wouldn't say that I did it myself, because without Siyata D'Shmaya, I couldn't see anything being done here. Because as I'm looking today again on a Ksaviyad, I was trying to see if it's written, if I copied it right, I would say, I don't know how you did it, and I really don't know how, but that's what happened, and that's what it is. And I would say that the Siyata D'Shmaya, that the Sefer came out, as the Sefer has been mentioned a lot by Yaakov in other places.
Yes, you mentioned the manuscript, which is the British Library. As you mentioned, I'm going to try to put a link in the show's notes to pictures, because there's beautiful color pictures in the Sefer, which there'll be a link also in the show's notes for people to purchase. But there's color pictures, and you zoom in and you show exactly what's going on. I mean, just for someone to visualize for a second, even though, like I said, I'll put a link to a picture, but to visualize, you have a Makres Gedolos in a little bit older font. It's an older edition, a few hundred years ago, and even if someone of Makres Gedolos today, he has notes every part of the Sefer. And you can describe it a little bit more how the Ksaviyad is written, but there's notes on the margin, notes in between different mafarshim, in between the psukim. They're all over. They're going different directions also. Up, the regular way to Sefer, sideways, backwards, not backwards, upside down. It's mamish in small letters. So maybe describe a little bit more the Ksaviyad, even though, again, this is just audio, but it's really fascinating. I mean, how he worked in this for 50 years, he just kept adding and adding as he learned Chumash.
Yeah, so I would say so. First of all, he had this big Chumash. This was the Venezia Chumash printed in, I think, in year top Gimel, Shin Venezia
Shinhei. And
this is a Chumash like a big Makros Gedolos. It has the Chumash and Rashi and Targum and Ramban and the Perish from Maria Avua. That's the Perushim has in the Chumash. So basically, he's just started to be using when he was quite young. You can recognize the Ksaviyad when he was young. If you can see when you see it on page number, there's no page number here, 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth page. You can see these small letters, very small letters. That's on Ramban. And this writing is when he was very young. You can see in other form it has in the British Library. I would say, just to make clear, the whole Sifriya from Yaakov Emden was split in two. There's Kisveyad and Sforim with marginal notes. The Sforim with marginal notes came onto British Library. The Kisveyad came to Oxford and Bodleian Library. And so while I was working on the Chumash, I was just took out all this Sforim of this Sforim with his marginal notes in British Library, And as you can see, there's forum on Shus Marik, let's say, and there's this handwriting of this when it was quite young. You can see the handwriting is very very nicely and very small, very interesting. But you can see it's from his younger years. As he got older, he was trying to write very he was trying to work. We saw that he was trying he wrote just others or just marginal notes for himself. He was trying to work on to make a masterpiece on the Chumash. So he was starting just to write Torahs. It's quite the Gilyonis. The margins are quite widely. This place to write quite a lot, and he was starting to write as you see the first copy. The first picture on the Mavoy, you see on the right-hand side, there's a nicely writing, very Mesuda, very nice, and clearly he's starting. Well, it's a small copy, but it's very nicely Mesuda. As past the years, there was no place anymore on this side, so he's writing between the Rambam and the Chumash. There's how much place is there? There's not much. So he's just trying to push in words here and there. And when he had another aura, so he's trying to push it between the rows. So he was writing just like as two editions. So as the years come by, it got more complicated, more complicated. As it looks like when you look at the Chumash, it looks like it's well, you can't say it's very clean and nicely, because it's full wherever you move and you see, and to figure out what belongs here and there was one of the hardest thing to get through on this Chumash. And I would say so. So the Meister, what the Yaavetz did here, he was trying to first of all to fix the nusach of the Targum. Targum Onkelos. So he just this is one part I didn't do here because it belongs to someone who's into Targum. He was being the Nikud on Targum. He has a shit on the Nikud on Targum that if it's that the Sefer Daniel is like there's Dikduk in Lashon HaKodesh, but what's the Dikduk in Targum? So he says the Dikduk in Targum should be in Sefer Daniel. So he was trying to fix the whole Targum. Shouldn't be any mistakes in the Targum. So he just did Nekidus anywhere, and to sometimes he fixed took out all the Yuden shouldn't be there, and sometimes there's quite a also did on the Targum. So and he made it like a parish. He called this parish on the Targum Gal 8. The Perushim on the Posik himself, he would call Eim LaBinah. That's the Perushim on the Posik. And there's Eim LaBinah, that's a beer on the Meforshim from the Chumash. And then there's Gal 8, that's on the Targum. And then there's Machnaim al Derech HaSod. The Yaakov was very famous in his Sod. We can see in his Siddur, it's full of Derech HaSod. And interesting to quote the Chassid Sofer and they printed in Vienna, Tufki Ein Hai, I think. They printed a Machzeh, and they asked the Chassid Sofer if they can print this Machzeh. So the Sofer said you can print the Machzeh and put in all the halachas of Yaakov Emden, but not the Chelik HaSod. But you shouldn't put in the Machzeh, because it's not for the Moinan. But as known, the Yaakov Emden was full of Torah HaSod, as we find in this Chibur Machnaim, is just very, very, very kitzer, but there's quite a lot of Torah HaSod there. And well, that's basically the Chumash that is in the British Library, and we try to work on it.
So yeah, as you mentioned, that first picture, you could, for those that'll be able to see, again, I'll put a link, but just to describe it, as even that first, part you said where he wrote, and then later on the second edition, he was writing in between sometimes what he wrote originally, because he wrote big originally. So it's like a big jumbled, I don't want to call it a mess, but it's almost what it looks like. But then you see it,
just not trying to say this word, but that's how it looks like.
Yeah, that's how it looks like, but it's also fascinating to see, and especially how you made this entire sefer from it. So, and you mentioned the Eim LaBinah and then the parts, the Eim LaMaseres, Galei, Machanayim. So, first of all, just as a side, so the Galei, the part in Onkelos, you're saying is not included in this sefer. That part you didn't publish.
I didn't publish the nusach of the Targum. I published everything he wrote. He margined note on the Targum, any perushim or just tikkunim, anything. But I didn't print the Targum itself. It would be quite interesting for someone to do it. And that's basically what I said.
Okay, now on the one of the pages here, you made this kind of sharblat where you, as you said, you say Eim LaBinah, Eim LaMaseres, Galei Machanayim, which is the lashon of Rabbi Yaakov Emden. Yaakov Emden wrote this, so obviously he didn't print the sefer as we're getting to, but he did publish a kind of Moidar Rabbi Reisa, kind of a broadside. How do we call it?
Yeah, this Moidar Rabbi Reisa was like is to he was short of money, and he wanted to print a chumash, and he says here how he describes this in this Moidar Rabbi Reisa. Interesting, the Moidar Rabbi Reisa isn't signed his name on it, as if it's like all the Kehillis he was trying to walk around in all the Kehillis, let's say in Amsterdam and Hanover and Vienna, Petersburg, Copenhagen, Frankfurt, Metz, Bonn, Hamburg, London, Berlin, Rechnitz, Breslau, Piotr, all these places, and the Rosh Kehillis should like to get the people to donate money to get down to this big job he wanted to do. His plan was to print a Chumash. You call it a Mikra Godel with all Targumim, with the Yonis Ben Azil and Targum Yerushalmi, and with the Nacht itself, the Targum Divrei Yomim, and then his Perushim, Eim LaBinah, Eim LaMaseres, and Galei Machanayim. And then he wanted to print the Sefer Yosef on Maaseh Bereishis, and the Sefer Chinuch, and what else? With a big, we wanted to print it very big and nicely, and so it was a whole work. But I would say, I wouldn't say that this is the mice of this parish that Rabbi Yaakov wanted to print in the end, because as Rabbi Yaakov used to work on his forum, he was used to write aguras, even in Shilis Yaavetz, when he printed sometimes some tshuvas. These are tshuvas where he wrote aguras, let's say he had agur on Shuvas Rashbe. He wrote his margin notes on Shuvas Rashbe, and then he printed it in Lechem Shemaim, let's say. In Sechtes Tumid, there's a whole tshuva there about Tovus Haneres. And the same thing with a lot of tshuvas. He used to just, and it was even a Sefer Migdalois. He wrote Hagoyes on Chovis Alvovas, his notes on Chovis Alvovas, and then he took them in the Migdalois. He quoted the Chovis Alvovas, and he made a Sugrayim, and wrote his agos. The same agos there's in British Library. You can see all this for him, how it looks like, and how you built on the Migdalois. So it sounds like the Chumash Eim LaBinah should be done in this way. He started writing his notes, and then he wanted just to get on it and make it to a big chibur. And we haven't got this chibur any today, but the chibur here is quite interesting chibur. That means it's not the shleimus. You can't say it's the final chibur, but there's quite a lot here. You can see his way of thinking, a way of looking of things. Besides the big chedushim, you can find in this chumash. So I would say a few points what he does in this sefer. First of all, it's very interesting. He's been Akiva is dorish kol essen shebetorah. Every essen the Torah has a drash. Well, we don't know any drushes on the essen, all the drushes. But Rabbi Yaakov took this chimish, and where there's an S, we write it something. The S ort has been marred with something, and it's quite interesting. But sometimes he has a ribui that you don't find in Chazal. There's such a thing. Let's say I'll say a dogma first. Let's say in Parshas Shmois. It says that Moshe Rabbeinu took his mate. Just in Posik, that's Kapitel Dalet, Posik Yitzayin. So it says, "Ve'ef hamata hazeh tikach biyodecha, asher ta'aseh bo yoises." So what it means, ve'es hamate, you see, as he took something with his mate. So he says, shenichei b'tik, he has to put his mate in a tik, shouldn't be with the mate himself. Well, you don't find the Chazal that was such a thing. But as Rabbi Yaakov Emden went with his kav, that S means to be marbe something. So he made the drosha shenechei betik. As I said, there's a marginal note. I was trying to bring something hezber or explanation to understand why do we have to have a matter, because like if the Mishnah says and that's why when he's talking to the Shechina in the snare, he shouldn't be going with his makli. So he has to put in his tick. This is like a way of the cheretz. And he goes on with it. In Parshas Chukas, you can see the same thing about the mata and the Maimerivo. So he says also quite a few times the es mata es. And he says the same thing because he had the tick and had to take it out. It's interesting. But sometimes he has a S, he takes Droshes Chazal, or Chazal say it on someone else, and he tries to put it to stick it onto this posik. And this is one of the things that's very interesting, but it goes over the whole Chumash to be the Droshes on the S. It's very interesting. And there's another thing he's trying to do wherever there's a posik. Chazal say always, let's say, if say Motzei to Motzei, is Dibur Torah Koloshen Ben Odom. There's a drash, and Rabbi Yaakov Emden, when there's a double word in the posuk, let's say in Parshas Matros, we see there's a posuk, you say Leso Isa Nafshe Yidoy Neder, Osra Isa, Hofe Yofe. All these, he says he tries to explain why there's a kfeilus in the posuk. It's also like he's trying to bring down anything what sounds interesting in pshat. He's trying to put it into the pshat, because always there's full of droshes in the Gemara on any sort of posik. But if he was trying to put it down to a pshat that you understand the posik with a pshat, in the pshat you can understand the kfeilus of the posik. Im hoyo siel ish. So he says al de mame beivuma. There's a chiddush in Maimeh. The Pasuk wants to say that the Siyah Ish could be a Siyah with Kedushin, and it can say Hoya Siyah Ish with the Maimeh Kedushin. It's an interesting thing what he's trying to go over the whole Chumash. And there's another point he's trying to explain the Chumash, all the names of he quotes it himself in the Modor Rabbah, that he wants to get you to understand. Leva hate of Ezen Mekoyim Shel Mishpachos Bnei Noach Shemenes Yashav Olam V'Atzoysom Shemes Etzem Shel Mekoyim Vayoros Hamoskoros B'Torah. He was trying to obtain all the names that has an explanation. He darshans every name of any name of a place, or some of the Bnei Noach gave a name. Let's say. If you see him Pashas Noach, Kapitel Yid Pasuk Beis, Bnei Yefes Goyim Mogoy V'Modai V'Yovan V'Tivel V'Meshech V'Tiros. So he tries to explain every name. What's Goyim? Goyim has any meaning? So he's trying to say Goyim is like a gachal, something very hot. Mogoy Mogoy that Modai Moidet. You had, let's say, a lot of shtochim. So it was Moidet V'Tevel Metubel V'Meshech Ish Meshech V'Keshes. He was a Baal Melchome. Tris B'Fnei Aperonius. Everything has a meaning. Interesting, in Parshas Masay, we just read this Shabbos, he says, I was quite interesting to know if there's someone who would know a makor for these things. He says, Ato Agale, I'll tell you something very new. Kamasor Seile, Im Shoy Rubam Kekulam B'Midbar Be'eretz Tzir V'Tzalmoves. Afal Piken, Lo Hoy Kulam Shovim Gruim. Not all of them were the same with a bad. It sounds like the Masoris in the Midbar was very like in a bad matzah, a bad situation. They had the honor to make straight there, or you could walk and stay there. But he says no. There's quite. You can say nearly half of them were nice places. How do you know? So he said, so he says that all are nice places. How do I know that? Because I explained them that the Pasuk says that the Pasuk means a good thing. Okay, it's interesting. So he says, let's say, Har Yofe. Okay, but let's say on this, on how you offer Oyot Tvoso is Eretz Chayve Benach Lemoim, Orimim Poretz Megadle Remoinim, Resomim Megadle Resomim. You can see it in Targum Yonis Menezil too. But if you see, let's say, Berfidim, Mokem Mirpad Mirpedos is of something, a special place, like a nice place. Chatzeres, Mokem Miyushev, Mebota Chatzerim. Livno, Megadle Il Livno. So there's a nice place and nice trees. It's interesting. He says that I couldn't find a Makor. If you see in Medrash Tanchum, it sounds like everything was a Mokem Shtzir with Salmovis. But as Rabbi Yaakov Emden says, he wants to dance on these names, so he just, that's what he does. And it's interesting, it's a big chiddush. And I was trying to look in quite a meforshim. If you see something, there's a bit in Rekeach, but it's interesting. It's interesting for himself.
Another interesting aspect of the Sefer is sometimes he brings down things. So, and you bring it in the Sefer. I'll give an example. In Parshas Lech Lecha, in Perek Zayin, Pasuk Tes, Eim LaBinah Avram, V'ata Espriti Tishmer, Ato V'Zaraka Acharecha, although there is some, he's Messiah, and he brings down, he quotes his Migdal Ois, and it wasn't in all editions of Migdal Ois, so you bring it down in the actual text. It's actually a very fascinating Migdal Ois. I don't know if you wanted to mention it at all. And also, another question also to ask is that Yaakov Emden, famous, people familiar with Megillah Sefer, his autobiography, so he obviously talks a lot about himself and personal anecdotes. Are there any stories or personal anecdotes in this Sefer, from this Ksav Yad, that you came across?
Okay, it's first of all, we go to this Parshas Lech Lecha. It's interesting. This Migdal Ois, it's a very, when I published it in Yeshua, and as quoted here in the margin note, Oschov Ches in Parshas Lech Lecha, as Migdal Ois, it's interesting. There's two editions of Migdal Ois with the Yaavetz himself printed out, and in most of Migdal Ois, all the copies have been printed from, there's missing one page. You can see in the Migdal Ois, if you open it, the Migdal Ois in the beginning, it says he's talking about the Tam and Mila. Okay, and he says Masha Kosev Rambam here. He says v'chulu, and there's missing one page. And as I was sitting in British Library, I found the Migdal Ois, who belonged to the Yaavetz himself, and I can see there's another page, a whole arich, another page, mamash a whole page, which I can't find in our Migdal Ois. And as I see, there's a marginal note on this printed page. What there isn't in others form, there's a whole sofa. So it was very interesting. So I took a copy, and while working on the Chumash, I can see that he's quoting Lemaisa this Migdal Ois that it was missing in all editions, in most of the editions. So I thought if he's quoting this piece, so I'll bring the whole piece because it's not famous. Nobody has this piece, so why shouldn't it be here when he's quoting it? And I was trying to put on the Gosam Ksav Yad, the marginal notes on the Migdal Ois there. The problem was that the library, just as they were binding this for him, they just cut off the notes. So it was quite hard to figure out what says this. So you can see there's a lot of Sugaim Rebois. Just I was trying to figure out, to guess what he's trying to say. I hope we can understand what's said. But the whole topic there is very interesting. He says the interesting point, and just say, as you always see in the Yaakov Emden, his kedusha, and his kedusha, his thought is burning in him. You can see that he says that Klal Yisrael needs much more energy and koyach to get on the generation, and that's why the mitzvah Mile be'etzem does the opposite, as known from the Rambam. That's lahachlish koyach hatavos. He said it's the opposite, just to make more power and more energy to bring Yiddish Adoros Laman Yitzhaves Bonavas Beis Achor. It's an interesting point. Anyone has, you can look inside. It's very, very interesting. It's mechudesh and interesting. as the Rambam's Mahalach is very known, and nobody knows this part of the Rambam. So could be Rabbi Yaakov Emden tried to print it, and I don't know what happened, why it took it out or printed it. You can see in the Shur, and you can see the whole thing, how it happened, the whole thing. It's interesting. This is about the first thing you asked. And the second thing, about personal things, you can't see a lot of personal things here, but there's one interesting thing, and it's very shy for these days for Tisha B'Av. He's talking about the Pasuk says in Pashas Eikev. It's Omer Tov Kif Tes in the Sefer. So he says about the Simlos Kol Bolzum Elecho. As the Ramban says, Rashi says that the Anan Ekuved or Shofim Biksusen and Megatzim Oisam Kmekelim and Gehotzim Tetchanai clothes, and the clothes grew together with them, and so the Ramban has a whole thing to ask on Rashi. So he says in Sof, he says that the Simlos Kol Bolzum Aboim Shona isn't a big chiddush. He says, Vani Hoili Malbish Mebeget Seme. I had this malgish from Nitzba po omim rabbis becoming min nitzeva shirashtiv ma'ovizal. Chacham Tzvi, his father, Chacham Tzvi, the great Chacham Tzvi. So he had his beged, he had the Yerusha from his father. In his kaseni bo yosim mechamish mishon, he used to use this beged more than 50 years. It's quite interesting to someone to say we all wear something for a year maximum. That's it. והלכתי בשונם רבס בתמידוס כל יום, גם במסע דרוכם רחוי כמו יסילובש בוי, בכל זאת לבולה ונפסד. So he thinks it's like it's a plain thing. It's of course לבולה ונפסד. It sounds like if you have a beged of Chacham Tzvi, such a holy person of Chacham Tzvi, so it's quite interesting why it's not so hard to understand why it was so nicely kept. It would just take off the dust of this beged. It just wasn't the kabed. He quotes another thing, interesting. I used to put it on Tisha B'Av. He says, even though but the interesting thing to put on a beged because of the zeicha for his father on Tisha B'Av. Like it's a chiddush la'alocha, I can see, but there's Indian from Avelis to put together his personal Avelis to Avelis Beis Hamikdash, and with putting on a beged of his father is a nekud of Avelis. Okay, it's interesting. This is, I think, the only personal thing in this sefer.
Fascinating. And the first thing in Parashat Lech Lecha, once again, so it's on in the Sefer, it's page Samach to Samach Gimel, and in Yeshurun, it's volume Lamed Beis, for those interested in seeing it. Now, another thing about the Sefer, this is something that you note in the Hakdama. Yaakov Emden was famous for his comments on certain Svarim, certain Gedolim, so there is that in the Sefer, but this is something, as you note in the Hakdama, you did not bring down, you rather made a star. You just put a star in those places. So if you could just, I don't know, I mean, you write in Akdama why, so just talk about why you decided to do this. Okay.
As we all know, Rabbi Yaakov Emden has in his writing was very, he had very bituyim charifim, we call it, very sharply way of writing things on Gedolim sometimes, and as he used the Chemish, and he was, let's say, he took a piece of Ibn Ezra, and he wasn't happy with Ibn Ezra. He would write very, very, very strongly against Ibn Ezra. So Lamaisa, what happened when I just finished the whole Sefer? I sent it to someone who was quite into, was a big Talmid Chochem, a Goen, and was very interested in all this for him, Bleibish Pshevos from Belgium. And as he got the Sefer, a few days later, he just called me back. I wanted to tell you, don't print all these Lashonis Neged Gedolim. And he quoted his father that there was a true son, that someone found the Xavier of the Bach, and was quite Lashonis not very, very strongly, not with enough the hertz for the Gdolim in his time. And he said, if it's in for the Shaitoi, but you can't print today these Lashonis. It's not a Torah for the Mechaber. And well, if he says, I would do it. And just before printing, I was writing the Akdome. I found what Rabbi Yaakov Emden himself writes in the Lechem Shemayim, the second edition, which we printed, the second edition Lechem Shemayim, and he says that sometimes תפסתי לפעמים לושן הסוג על גדול לאוילום שקוטנם רחובי מוסני ואובי וציפורנה מקרייסי טויבה מי יתנני מצה תחס רגליהם man yovle my Friday Rabbanon Kedishin Malin Einen Chahava Sames Osezois Omer V'Yaldis Shehoyse Bi He'asti Pone B'Rabois Nishmos Eida. That's what Yaakov Emden says. Loi Barom Ezricha Chas V'Sholom Kibel Shonis Mergolem B'Talmid. Then it says V'Mikol Ze Nimlachti V'Chazarti Bi She'ein Nishtamesh B'Shavitom V'Mochakti Harbe B'Ovri Shenes Al Dvore. So he says himself that he would take off quite a few Lashonis against these Gedolim. So I thought if I just found it now, so it sounds like it's a message from Yaakov Emden himself that I shouldn't print these things. But as people are very interested these days to know everything, what's hidden, what this thing hasn't been printed. So I just put like a little star. If someone wants to check the Ksaviyat and see what he wrote on anyone who wrote, okay, he's welcome. But I don't think if it would be printed, people would like this way of talking on the Gdolim this way. But that's what I've been done with the Ru of Gdol Yisrael. So as I said, the whole Sefer is Katadishmani have been printed. So this is a part of the thing what I didn't do in my own opinion.
Yeah, so, all right, but exactly, you didn't engage in the censorship in that way that there's a star, you can check the Ksaviyat. Now, another thing about the Sefer, so we mentioned already how you bring down that Megillah, that piece, but in general, your other work on the Sefer, besides obviously going through the Ksaviyat, which is, again, for those that will see the pictures, I don't know how you did it. What else, what kind of footnotes did you include, sources, what else did your work entail when you worked on the Sefer?
Okay, well, I would say, first of all, wherever he always says Ein, he would say Ein there, and Ein here, Ein there, where he wrote someone else. I was trying to bring this piece, piece on the footnotes. But sometimes, it's interesting, sometimes, let's say in Parshas Masai, I think there's in Parshas Yisro and in Parshas Masai. There's two times I did till I figured out what it means, but and let's say in Parshas Yisro, it should be in the middle of the Seres HaDibros. I will say for just one thing before that. You can see in Omed Reish Samach in the Sefer, like in Parshas Yisro. Zocher Shem HaShabbos Lekatshoi says Zocher, so he writes Gilion Paneich Rose. Gilion Paneich Rose is that's as I said before. There's a Sefer Paneich Rose. Paneich Rose we can see us where we found it in the British Library, and there's a goes on Paneich Rose marginal notes from Yaakov Emden on the Sefer. So he just tried he just show you to go to the Paneich Rose, and then the copy what says on the Gillian there. So I quoted Gillian Paneich Rose, so I brought the Loshon Paneich Rose. The Gillian Kosav, what he says in the Gillian. This happens quite a lot. Gillian Paneich Rose, Gillian Mashor sometimes. There's a Sefer Mashor LaTorah. He had quite a lot of overs. And there's a few times he quoted, let's say, he says in Posik, in page Reishnin Ches from the Sefer, that's the Kapitel Chov Posik Beis. It says, first you can see, Onoichi, Paneich Rose. Paneich Rose, so he says, Paneich Rose means, when he says Paneich Rose, it means what I wrote on the Gillian Paneich Rose. So I'll try to bring this part. And it says Ve'ayin, so you just said Ve'ayin, this was like Ve'ayin, Yud Aleph, Pei Tes Vov. It was quite hard to figure out what it means. Then there's another place in Parshas Masai that also quoted, to just say Ve'ayin. There where he said just Yud Aleph, Pei Tes Vov. And this is a chelik from Ramam Pano, and he thought it's like he would printed it in a chumash. That's why we brought these pieces too. And there's another thing which we try to quote a lot. Sometimes you can see that he writes on the Ksav Yad, he notes like he makes a simon that he wants to say something. And I was looking at the Chumash, I couldn't find anything there. And I was trying to look out in his forum where he wrote something about it. As you see in Parshas Boy, Kol ben Nechol Yechol Boy. Oh, that's page Reish Lamed Daled in the Sefer. Kol ben Nechol Yechol Boy. So the Targum says Kol bar Yisrael di Ishtamed lo Yechol Boy. So he just wrote the Ishtamed. There's a note on the word on the Targum the Ishtamed, and the page is empty. If it would be filled out of notes and there's no place to write anything, it's interesting. The page is empty. He didn't write anything. It sounds like that he made a simon for himself. I have something written somewhere else on it, and it has to become here. So we found it in Luach Eres about Beneichov, Mishemodim. It's very familiar. People who the one who knows that in Yaakov Emden in the Siddur, V'la Malshinim, there's a distance says V'la Mishemodim, and this is the whole discussion there. And he brings it. That's the topic being Beneichov. Is it's Shmad or not Shmad? If it's Makir Boine there, it's an interesting piece. That's what we were trying to put on these pieces where he didn't write anything on the Chumash. And I was trying to bring things what al derech hapshat, just al derech hapshat from some different places in the Siddur. Just al derech hapshat, because in derech hadrish there's quite a lot. You can just go on and on and on. And it should be might be another sefer just the kutim of the Yaakov Emden and others for him b'negei the Chumash. But I didn't do. I just brought these things korov lapshat to be like near to the chibur Yaakov Emden wanted to make. And there's one place I quoted. There's a whole shuva in Shulis Yaavetz that quoted in page Tov Aleph. Hine mitzaras kasholek. Yaakov Emden asked that the Kashav Toisvis, who was being masked Miriam, which was a Korov. So he says, "In Kisha Zuba Achroina Eim LaBinah b'Shulis Yaavetz Chelik Aleph Siman Kif Lamed Ches." So I quoted the whole shuva, and it's quite a very interesting shuva, famous shuva, and very interesting that there's no there's shaykh din negoim. If there wouldn't be any shaylas, any suffix on the nega, so you can be timis negoim. This is a chiddush of Yaakov Emden, been quoted quite by the Marsham and the Astorah, has an interesting discussion about it. And of course, the Achronim were trying to bring rayas lekan and lekan. So this is the tshiva I brought here, with quite a lot of footnotes to go through the whole Masechtas Neguim to see if there's rayas lekan and lekan. It's a very interesting topic to go into. And that's basically the things that are being quoted. And I was trying to just not to put on a lot of footnotes, not to get out of the Kavanah Sefer, but that means if I would be writing like a parish on this chinush, this Eim LaBinah, I think it was like a poet from Reid Bites. It was much more ours than the Sefer itself. But the Meshech for the years, the people, Tamid HaChachomim, who wrote me quite a lot of emails here and there, that I should have been writing like a bit more bio and more pirush on the Chinush. That might be for the next edition. But that's for sure. It's a safer to learn and to look into it. There's a lot to see in it.
Yeah, as we just mentioned a little bit here. So you do bring all Makairis in here, and there are footnotes as well. There are plenty of footnotes, but like you said, not a whole big beer. Also, something else is that you mentioned is the whole Moedah Rabbi L'Oraisa, where you took out some of what the Sefer that he wanted to print that he didn't print. But why is it exactly the name Eim LaBinah so comes from him, right? This name of the Sefer you took from him. Does he explain why he wanted to call it Eim LaBinah?
I don't remember why he calls it Eim LaBinah, but Eim LaBinah is a pasuk in Mishnah, Eim LaBinah Tikku. And why he called it Eim LaBinah? Interesting question. But he mentions it quite a lot in his Agoyas on Shas. You can see Eim LaBinah, Eim LaBinah. As it sounds like you say, if it's that's Eim LaBinah on the Chumash himself is to understand the Chumash, and Eim LaMesoros. It's like Eim LaMikra and Eim LaMesoros. So he took the Eim LaMikra to make Eim LaBinah, and Eim LaMesoros. That's the Gemara in Sukkah and other places. Eim LaMikra, Eim LaMesoros. That sounds like, but why he called it just Eim? I don't know.
Now, also, this is the part that you printed just on Al Torah. There's also Chumash Megillas in this Chumash, and that was printed by someone else beforehand, right?
Yes, in Tzfunos. In Tzfunos, it was printed in Tzfunos because I didn't print it again because it's not the same sort of Hagoyas that he has here on the Chumash. Like it's in the Sefer of the Chumash, there's Chumash Megillas. There's quite a few hours there, marginal notes, and that's it. And not much more than that. I just brought here one copy in the Sefer of Shir HaShirim. It's an interesting copy, and I brought it for quite a few reasons. This Chumash had it there, if you see in the Mevoi, there's a copy of a page on Shir HaShirim. The page was torn. The originally Chumash was torn. So Yaakov just took a blank page, and he just wrote over the whole Targum and the Chumash and the Shir HaShirim and the Targum and Rashi, and on the base he even wrote a Ora on his Ksaviadas of the Chumash. And the reason I brought it here, because sometimes people and the auctions they find the Ksaviad and they want to know if it's Ksaviad or Yaakov Emden. So in the Ksaviad you can recognize if you ask anyone who knows how the Ksaviad is, you can see the difference with Ksaviad and another Ksaviad. But sometimes this Ksaviad is in Oisis Meribois. So here you have a whole, 15 or 20 tours of Ksaviad with the Oisis Meribois that Rabbi Yaakov Emden wrote. And it's very interesting, sometimes for Chadish Dinim himself, as if you see, I don't know if you can see here, there's a whole discussion once, famous discussion, Chazon Ish with someone about the Tzaddik Afucho. You're writing a Tzaddik with a Yid Afucho. And one of the biggest Tainus, you can see it here. One of the biggest Tainus because the Tzaddik Afucha, as if it came from Shabbat Tzvi. And if you see Rabbi Yaakov Emden, when he writes, you can see in this copy in Shir HaShirim, if you see in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In the 11th Shura, it says, Ksiv v'tzalias chano b'neviyam. So the Tzaddik of the Tzalias is a Yud Afucha. If it would be of Shabbat Tzvi, Yaakov Emden wouldn't write Tzaddik Afucha, that's for sure. So it's quite a nice achocha. Even though if you don't have to come to, you can look in Morik Tzir and Similamed Beis and the Chistfilin, Yaakov Emden writes the how the Oasis, the Turas Oasis, you can also see there's a Tzaddik Afucha there. So it's a quite interesting point that the Tzaddik Afucha, it wasn't from Kat Shatz.
Right, it's just a fascinating page to see how he wrote it all back in the ripped page, and he even put the nekudas and everything. It's really, really interesting to see the Mavai. Now, that facing page was the next thing I was going to ask you about. So on the Sharblot, as you open up, you can talk about this. You're right. He says, "Lashem Haaretz U'Malaya, Chanani B'Zev V'Hayra Eneni B'Seresecha, Hakatan Yud Ayin Ayin B'Im Goyin Maratzmel to Maltana." So this is something that Yud Ayin Ayin. What is it? Yaakov Emden. Did he always call himself Emden? Not. So maybe we want to talk about a little bit about. Again, it's not about the Sefer itself, but this is something a discussion relating historically to Yaakov Emden.
As I quoted in just a page before, that in Shilis Yaavetz, someone wrote him a shaila. So he wrote him as Yaakov Emden, Yaakov from Emden. So Yaakov Emden was very very angry at him, and he says, Torah Yaakov Yisrael mechune Yaavetz tat lenikra ma'olam Yaakov Emden. Asher osa manuscript address al gabe geres. He wrote the address on the letter Yaakov Emden. Yodua sheneni b'bnei Emden. Lo noiled bo, v'lo mitzape leroisa. I don't know why we're so angry on this place. Lo mitzape leroisa. Ach mevakesh tevosa v'te'alta. Interesting. Kima ozim ikedem b'yosiroi b'tachas Maso. He was around there for 3 years. Kocha gam ata nishoyked al takanosa, and he answers this tshuva. So that's why Rabbi Yaakov Emden wouldn't call himself Yaakov Emden. He didn't like this thing. But in this Chumash, where you can see the Ksav Yad is also from his youngest years. It's the way the letters have been written is very like from the early days of his writings. And he says, Agoin. So he says, Hakoton Yud Ayin Ayin Ben Agoin Kamaratz Maltunu. So Yud Ayin Ayin, I wouldn't know what Yud Ayin Ayin means. I would say it means Yaakov Emden. And this was the time he was in Emden still. That's about that was about Tov Tzadik Beis in these years. And the thing what he wrote later, this is in the Tshuva. I think it's when he's called already Yaakov Yisrael. He put on his name Yaakov Yisrael because he wasn't well. I mean, he quotes it in the Akdoma Tzitzim Eprochim and in Sefer Apkos that he was not well, and he put on his name Yisrael to Yaakov. In the Chivas of Chelik Beis of Shulis Yaavetz, you can see a lot of Yaakov Yisrael and Mechune Yaavetz. Well, this is in the later days. So it might be when he was older, he didn't like this name Yaakov Emden. As he said always, that I make the brocha Borich Shlo Yasani Abad. Borich Shlo Yasani Oved, with the ayin, he said Borich Shlo Yasani Abad, and not a Rab. And he didn't want his Rabbonis even to talk. It's a whole, I don't think it's the issue now to discuss this whole thing.
Okay, so I mean that's obviously there's a lot of things to say for Pashup Pshat and other things that we didn't, like I said about Unkelis, we didn't go through Al Hasoid. There's a lot more in it. I think it's 600 pages, over 600 pages, a big sefer. And like I said, there'll be a link in the show's notes for those interested in purchasing it. I mean, just finally, I mean, who would you say someone would? There's obviously a lot of fascinating things as we discussed here, but is there someone you would say in particular you would think that people would enjoy benefits from using the sefer that you would suggest something about it?
It's interesting. It's an interesting question because people are very different, and what I would like, I'm not sure that the other one would like so much. But as I said, I can see that people are very interesting in the sefer because it's very original. It's very different than all this forum from his kufa and from his kufa before and after. It's very interesting. It's very very straight into the pshat and very stuck to the chumash, and it brings someone very near to a different world what he's used to be. I think that anyone who takes the sefer and just not looking just in the middle of the chodoidi, but taking the sefer as someone told me, a big Talmud Chochem in Bnei Brak, he used to be Mavaseder every morning after davening, Sheni, Shlishi, every day of the Parsha, and he used to the Mavaseder together with Eim LaBinah. So the moment he used to just do it, he took this 20 minutes to 20 minutes to take to Shnai Mikveh Tagim from Sheni to Shlishi, let's say, he used to take the Eim LaBinah, and what happened? He's a Talmud Chochem, so he just wrote me quite a few emails, one after another, Oris and Chidush Dinim, and interesting things we can discuss on the Sefer. You can. There's a place where you can get him very deeply in Chidushim, Laloche, and Pshat. And it's very interesting to one who takes it very seriously. It's very interesting Sefer. It sounds like it's a lifetime's work. It's not just a chibur he wrote and just as people are used to say that he had to print in his house, so he printed everything he had. Doesn't sound like this. It was a quite a heavily, seriously worked sefer.
Yeah, exactly. As anyone can see, especially from viewing how he added to the manuscript. So I will link to the sefer for anyone interested who can purchase it. I'll try to put a link to some pictures. Those can see first of all, anyone can buy the sefer will see like I said, it's reproduced in color and glossy paper on the pictures, which is really nice. You can really see that, but I'll link to that. I'll also link to the Chamish Megillas. I think there's someone who can access it online. And So with that, thank you very much for joining me to discuss the Sefer and Yaakov Emden.
Okay, and thank you very much for having me today. And I think it's a big success for you to be. It's not a positive thing. You can get through to thousands and thousands of people knowing a new chibur with Yaakov Emden. So mamish the of Dover the cave, and it just be like it's a tchias hamesim for Torah that was so many years, more than 250 years hidden and in a cellar in a British library, and we can just be in a hand and just because of your publication publicity you're doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.